Hello all and welcome. And I am the Practical Philosopher, also known as the MGTOW philosopher, depending on the type of video I'm making. In this video I'd like to talk about the Frankfurt School, the infamous school from Frankfurt, Germany, that was driven out right before the start of World War II by the Nazis, who didn't like their ideas and their politics. Big surprise. And they then moved to a welcoming host in America, who at the time thought that socialist, communist ideas were very vogue, very interesting, very great ideas. They had no idea what was actually going on in the Soviet Union. So the intellectuals in America thought that socialism was just awesome and were eager to study and implement it. So the University of Columbia in New York welcomed them with open arms as a social studies institute. Of course, it's their socialist, communist, Marxist group whose main bent is to transform the world into their view of the perfect socialist utopia, masked in the guise of institute studying social sciences. Yeah, social sciences. Anyway, so let's begin, shall we? Yeah. So the Frankfurt School is a school of social theory and philosophy, associated in part with the Institute for Social Research at the Goethe University, Frankfurt. Founded during the interwar period, the school consisted of dissidents who felt at home in none of the existent capitalist, fascist, or communist systems. What that essentially means is those systems didn't want them, okay? and they felt that communism in Soviet Russia had failed, but they couldn't figure out why, and it demoralized them very much. So they wanted to escape to somewhere that was ripe for the picking, that was ripe in terms of something they could develop into the perfect socialist system, something they could socially experiment on a grand scale, and finally find the answers to create the perfect society, which of course would come from socialism. Which, of course, hasn't worked to date, but that's just because that wasn't real socialism. Yeah, many of these theorists believed that traditional theory could not adequately explain the turbulent and unexpected development of capitalist societies in the 20th century. Meaning, as smart as they thought they were, they just couldn't figure out why so many societies had just on their own come about to be capitalist societies. Jeez, I mean, could it be that that's the best alternative, that that's the best system, that the society at the stage of development we are at now is naturally progressing into this particular type of system, that's just the natural process showing itself evolutionarily speaking in a cultural and economic sense? Couldn't be it's just a natural progression. No. That couldn't be. Then that would mean that was the better system or the right system. We can't have just people deciding what they're going to do and what businesses they're going to open and running their own lives. That doesn't work. You can't just have that. There's got to be some kind of centralized control. Vote for Bernie. Yeah. Critical of both capitalism and Soviet socialism, their writings pointed to the possibility of an alternative path to social development. An alternative path, yes. A path that essentially we're seeing today coming to fruition in both America and EU Europe. Although sometimes only loosely affiliated, Frankfurt School theorists spoke with a common paradigm in mind. They shared the Marxist Hegel premises. Hegel is another retarded philosopher. I'll talk about him in another video. And were preoccupied with similar questions to fill in the perceived omissions of classical Marxism, meaning the fuck-ups, the stuff that didn't work, which is the whole goddamn thing, really. They sought to draw answers from other schools of thought, essentially create a hodgepodge of different hypotheticals and theories from different schools of philosophy to address the many shortcomings of classical Marxism, which were essentially the whole goddamn thing. you know, and find the best ways they could to manipulate people, essentially. They create a system that would do the best job possible brainwashing and controlling society. Hence, using the insights of anti-positivist sociology, psychoanalysis, existential philosophy. I mean, this is all areas they're studying so as to figure out better ways to control people from a central authority. And other disciplines. The school's main figures sought to learn how to form and synthesize the works of such varied thinkers as Kant, moron, Hegel, moron, Marx, moron, Freud, coke addict, Weber, Simon. So most, if not all, of these people had some real problems in their personal lives, and their mental stability was questionable, and of course Freud was a drug addict. So Kant was a moron, Hegel was a moron. But let's take a look at something I read earlier in the description of the Frankfurt School, talking about anti-positivism. They sought to draw answers from other schools, hence using the insights of anti-positive sociology. Well, let's take a look at what the Wikipedia says about that, because you all know how much I like to define my terms. Anti-positivism, also known as interpretivism. I love it, interpret, yeah. Or negativism. They don't want to use the word negativism because it sounds negative. So anti-positivism, yeah, that's the kind of thing you would expect to come from an intellectual buffoon, is the belief within social science that the social realm is not subject to the same methods of investigation as the natural world. Okay, let me translate that into English. Science, bad. Our method, good. And then, of course, they devised the method for analyzing and studying society that cannot be interpreted using scientific method. When I read this, what I see is pure manipulation and just con artistry at work. Basically saying that, oh, well, you know, social science isn't science. You can't use science to understand sociology and social science. This is the one contradiction. First of all, this doesn't make any sense. How can you call it social science and say that it's not subject to the same methods of investigation as the natural world? Doesn't that mean it's not a science then, because the investigation of the natural world is science? Isn't that what science is? And by the way, for some of you who might not know this, science is a school of philosophy. That's right. It's a school of philosophy, a very specific school that is about the investigation of the natural world. And it has very strict guidelines and ways of exploring, studying the natural world. It's a very, very, very focused and well understood discipline. So you can't call social science if it's not subject to science. The social realm requires a different epistemology in which academics do not use the scientific method. How can it be science then if it doesn't use science? So this is what these charlatans like to do. This is what charlatans in general like to do. Let's make what we believe into science. Let's call it science, but we're not going to use any science to study it, because if we use science to study it, we'd see that it's nonsense and that it doesn't make any sense. There's no scientific evidence to support this. So they don't want science looking at it because, oh, well, science looks at it, science sees it doesn't work. Bread lines around the corner. Oh, bread lines are good. No, bread lines are not good. Those are some words of Bernie Sanders when he was younger, probably sleeping on his mother's couch. So science can very clearly demonstrate if something is valid or not. So right here, they're trying to use anti-positivistic methods in how their view of sociology, I'm not going to use the word science because what they're doing is not science. They just said so, it's not science. So what they're trying to do is use this anti-positivist view to create a new way of exploring sociology because the scientific method essentially tells the truth. It points out all the foibles of their theories and very clearly shows that it's nonsense. Anti-positivists hold that researchers need to be first aware that our concepts, ideas, and language shape how we think about the social world. So the anti-positivist is looking to be more like a relativist and interpret the world however he wants and just change the definitions of words and shape how people think. That's what anti-positivist philosophy is about. And that's in part why they adopted it. And you see this all the time with the definitions of words being changed. Racism and equality and fairness and equity. And all these words have taken on new and different meanings. So that's an anti-positivist explanation. That's a little definition of what you're talking about. It might explain a little about what you see in social justice warriors, and especially Bernie Sanders' ilk. So the following Marx, they were concerned with the conditions that allow for social change and the establishment of rational institutions. So let me break that down for you. The members of the Frankfurt School back in the 1930s, when they fled Germany because Hitler didn't like them and he was going to have them strung up, and they fled to America, which was a country full of useful, tolerant fools, their ideas about creating rational institutions were that they believed they were the intellectual elite and that they were most rationally equipped to design the necessary institutions for enacting social change that would benefit everyone, with an emphasis on the critical component of theory, which was derived significantly from their attempt to overcome the limits of positivism, materialism, and determinism by returning to Kant, a retard, Kant's critical philosophy and its successors in German idealism. Yes, I'll talk about idealism at another time. It's more nonsense, just destroying the world, wishful thinking, crap. Now, let's talk about, first of all, critical theory. So when he says overcome the limits, this is intellectual speak, which if you understand what their speak is and know what they're trying to say, they're saying that positivism doesn't quite do the job. We want to manipulate people and make everything open to interpretation and be able to essentially change the meanings of words willy-nilly. But it's not working quite well for that. It's doing an okay job, but we've got some gaps we need to fill in because that's not enough of a tool to change society and turn people into sheep and manipulate them at will. So we're going to get into critical theory now. Yes. Now, Kant, oh God, attributed to Immanuel Kant, the critical philosophy movement sees the primary task of philosophy as criticism. That's it. There you go. That's it. That's Immanuel Kant's entire contribution to the philosophical community. Hey, that don't work right. Why don't that work right? What's wrong with that? That thing has problems. That's a problem. That's it. That's his contribution, and as well as finding more and more complicated, convoluted ways to criticize things. And this is the School of Philosophy. School. It's essentially, saying that something ain't working when it's obvious something ain't working, or saying something isn't working when it is working. It's essentially applying criticism in ever more complex ways to muddy the water, to confuse people, okay, to obfuscate things so that you can use other aspects of their social science that isn't science by their own words to bring about the necessary, in their mind, because they hate capitalism, social changes. Aha. Critical philosophy is also used as another name for Kant's philosophy. Kant said that philosophy's proper inquiry is not about what is out there in reality. Let me see if I can translate that for you. Basically, philosophy should not be about finding answers, but just about criticizing shit. That's it. So, that was all he did. You know, I guess this lazy douchebag thought it was much easier to essentially just try and sound really clever by finding the things wrong with something without presenting another option. So, and that's why this goes very well with anti-positivism, also called negativism. They're both really a form of negativism in that sense. You know, they detract, they subtract something, they do not add something to an equation. If you're talking about critical philosophy, it's just all it is, it's taking out, hey, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. It's very, very negative in nature. It's a very demoralizing philosophy. Of course, that's one of the pillars of the Frankfurt School. With any society, the first step is to demoralize the society. And so Immanuel Kant was very big on his little critical philosophy that he thought was very clever, and in essence all it is a fancy form of criticism. Just criticize, 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 you know, to demoralize the speaker that you're talking to demoralize the listeners, to basically continue with your criticisms until people believe those criticisms and that the system is wrong, the system is flawed, and then the system needs to be changed. That with anti-positivism, which makes everything open to interpretation, everything is, relative, you know, and that you can't look at sociology with the scientific method. It requires a different type of epistemology, which they specifically teach. You can't learn it from science because regular science doesn't work on it, even though science can explore pretty much the veracity in terms of if something works or does not work of anything. So, you know, you do a study, boom, you make a claim. You want to see if that claim is true. You do a study. Oh, well, no, that doesn't work. Our school of social science that can't be looked at with science, but we call it science anyway to make it seem more valid, can't be looked at with science, but we'll call it science. So that's the Frankfurt School right there. Now, let's get back to America. And let's talk about America, because that's where the Frankfurt School eventually ended up, at the University of Columbia in New York, where they got a warm welcome. Columbia University, yes. Come on in, you beautiful communist bastards, you. I'd like to read this article I'm looking at now and comment on it. So what happened to the American traits of confidence, pride, and accountability? Pride, patriotism, loving your country, our sense of confidence that comes from coming from a good culture, a strong background, and the roots of Western cultural decay are very deep, having first sprouted a century ago. It began with a loose clan of ideologues inside Europe's communist movement. Today it is known as the Frankfurt School, and its ideals have perverted American society. Now, let's talk about what an ideologue is. So, simply put, an ideologue is somebody that advocates, zealously advocates, an ideology. In this case, their ideology is how best to formulate and run society. I'll say it again. Their ideology is how best to create the perfect society and run the perfect society. And believe me, these idiots thought they were going to be the ones behind the driver's wheel. It's always the idiots that think that. They're never the ones that end up in power. You always got the Lenins that end up in power. Always got the Stalins that end up in power. Not the doofus intellectuals that think this shit up. Okay? So get that into your head, you never-Trumpers, you anti-Trumpers, you bunch of anarchists out there that'll just go out there and destroy shit with any context, whatever's going on at the time in society, we'll just go out and pretend to be for that, so we can have a pretext to basically say government's evil and no government. Okay, and of course, for the real idiots out there like Antifa and the leftists that think this stuff is a good idea, they're all ideologues. They want to impose onto you a system of government where you have no control. Now, with the Frankfurt School, they had a lot of lofty ideals, but they all failed. And when outcomes failed, all they did was change the theory. For example, before World War I, Marxist theory, the Frankfurt School was built off of Marx's theories on social inequality. Another retard right there. The Frankfurt School, its pillars are in Marxism. And Marxist theory held that if war broke out in Europe, the working class would rise up against the rich and the intellectuals and create a communist revolution. Now, of course, as is the case with much of Marxist theories, they didn't go very well. When war broke out in 1914, instead of starting a revolution, the proletariat put on their uniforms and went off to war. Right. So all the freedom fighters, potential freedom fighters, just ended up fighting for the state and dying in very large numbers. Now, two very prominent Marxist thinkers of the day were Antonio Gramsci and Georg Lukács. God, my pronunciation's horrible. Each man on his own concluded that the working class of Europe had been blinded by the success of Western democracy and capitalism. Okay, yeah, all right. Now, how were they blinded? They reasoned that until both had been destroyed, a communist revolution would not be possible. What they're saying is that because Western democracies were so successful at raising the poor person up and giving everybody the chance to actually have some wealth and drag themselves out of poverty, that this blinded people. They blinded those poor bastards in Soviet Russia. And they reasoned that until, now get this again, the purpose of this school, which is at Columbia University, is to destroy America. In America, this school is taking root very strongly. They reasoned that until both had been destroyed, a communist revolution was not possible. Meaning democracy had to go, and Westernism and Western culture had to go. Now, Gramsci and Lukács were both active in the Communist Party. But their lives took very different paths. Gramsci was jailed by Mussolini in Italy, where he died in 1937 due to poor health. In 1918, Lukács became Minister of Culture in Bolshevik Hungary. During this time, he realized that if the family unit and sexual morals were eroded, society could be broken down. You got to understand, these people, I mean, they were like the evil guys in the doctors in the German army experimenting on all those Jewish prisoners, except they're experimenting on society. They're playing around, they're playing games with tens of millions of people's lives in different countries across war in Europe, unstable countries destabilized by war, and so they were playing games, essentially, in cultures that were very unstable, that were, before and after the war, still evolving, a lot of change, and so these were prime targets for them to go in, gain some kind of position of power or authority, be it through academics or government, and enact certain changes and then sit back and look at what happened. It's that simple. So look at this right. So this is one of the Frankfurt School's tenets. Break down the family unit. Erode sexual morals. And you can break down society. Lukács implemented a policy titled Cultural Terrorism, which focused on these two main objectives. A majority part of the policy was to target children's minds through lectures that encouraged them to deride and reject Christian ethics. Now let me say that again. Deride and reject Christian ethics. Yes, that's right. Mainly the perfect tool for that being Islam today. They found their perfect tool. Now, in these lectures, graphic sexual matter was presented to children, and they were taught about loose sexual conduct. In Hungary. Oh my God. Here again, a Marxist theory has failed to take hold in the real world. The people were outraged at Lukács' program, and he fled Hungary when Romania invaded in 1919. Again, the school, this Frankfurt school, it was active well over 100 years ago. Quite a long time that Marxist theories have been played around with, and people have tried to add to them to fill in the omissions, the areas that don't work, to further enhance its ability to change society into that wonderful, wonderful paradise. But of course they have to use means like teaching children to be loose sexually. The birth of cultural Marxism. All was quiet on the Marxist front until 1923, when the cultural terrorists turned up for a Marxist study week in Frankfurt, Germany. Very funny. Isn't it amazing that both the Nazism and this garbage became truly powerful in Germany? There, Lukács met a young, wealthy Marxist named Felix Weil. Until Lukács showed up, classical Marxist theory was based solely on the economic changes needed to overthrow class conflicts. Weil was enthused by Lukács' cultural angle on Marxism. Weil's interest led him to fund a new Marxist think tank, the Institute for Social Research. It would later come to be known as simply the Frankfurt School. So, not only did Nazism come to life in Germany, but so did really, really, really powerful cultural Marxism. Okay? Not what you see in old Soviet Russia under the Soviet Socialist Republic. This is something else. It's still socialism. It's still Marxism, what you see there, but these people didn't feel, they saw that it didn't work in Russia. It wasn't working. This wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't what they intended. So they, in their own ways, in their own countries, tried to enact these programs, but with their own ideas to make it better, to make it work. And of course, it failed everywhere. So what did they do? They just kept trying and trying. Of course, they had only been able to this point fuck things up on a minor scale in small little developing agrarian, rural European countries like Hungary. They hadn't really been able to reap mass havoc and destruction yet. I mean, this particular group, anyway. You had the Marxists and the communists in Russia reaping tons of death and starvation, because none of this stuff works, because the foundational premise is wrong. That you can enforce equality on society and redistribute wealth, it's a false premise. So no matter what they try, it'll all fail because it's built on a foundation of sand. But they don't get that. So, like any stupid intellectual, they kept trying. Of course. And it was simply known as the Frankfurt School. In 1930, the school changed course under new director Max Horkheimer. The team began mixing the ideas of Sigmund Freud. So, Sigmund Freud was considered a brilliant innovator in the world of psychology and a psychoanalyst. And of course, they love that. The idea of manipulating people. And really, that's what they learned about from studying Freud, human behavior, human nature. They want to know how best to manipulate people, essentially. Now, if we look a little closer, the people, So, Sigmund Freud with those of Marx and cultural Marxism. Now, in classical Marxism, yes, this was the classical Marxism under the Soviet regime. The workers of the world were oppressed by the ruling class. Okay, that's not working. Let's change it. Let's make it a psychological oppression. So the new theory that the Frankfurt School came up with to essentially alter and change society to make it perfect was that everyone in society was psychologically oppressed by the institutions of Western culture. Western culture is the great evil. No, but it is a very strong force, and it gets in the way of what they think is the perfect social model, which would have them as the ones calling the shots. The school concluded that this new focus would need new vanguards to spur the change. The workers were not able to rise up on their own. So, it wouldn't surprise me if many of these idiots actually believed this. I think they looked at old Soviet Russia and said, hey, it wasn't the workers. I mean, they weren't strong enough. It wasn't their fault that it didn't work. It's not the problems are still the same. We weren't wrong. The workers are oppressed, and the workers saw that and rose up. But it's just not enough to free them from the shackles that are holding them back from being able to create the perfect socialist paradise. Now, as fate would have it, the National Socialists came to power in Germany in 1933. And it was a bad place and time to be a Jewish Marxist, as most of the school's faculty was. That's right! As many people do not know that most of the members of the Frankfurt School were Jews. So, instead of sticking around in Hitler's Germany, where they would have competition for their ideas from a guy that would basically hunt them down in the night and kill them with his jackbooted thugs, they decided, let's move to New York City, which is the bastion of Western culture at the time. And you got to understand that these are a lot of, many of them are wealthy, douchebag intellectuals who believe they're on a mission from, whatever. It's their mission, their heroes in a socialist battle to save humanity from the decadence of Western culture. Then they decided in their little think tank that Western culture is the main roadblock to their success. It's the Western culture that's the problem. That's why their ideas didn't work in communist Russia, and it's too late for them. We can't change things there in any significant way. They've already got their own demagogue in power. They've already got their own dictator in power. We can't do anything about that. So now we got to go somewhere else where it's ripe pickings for our ideas. So on to America. Now, coming to America. In 1934, the school was reborn at Columbia University. Its members began to exert their ideas on Western culture. Now, at that time, and even now, Columbia was a major school of learning. And so this place was one of the best places, one of the best schools to enact their program to destroy Western culture. And the school published a lot of popular material. The first of these was critical theory. Now, critical theory is a play on semantics. As I said earlier, it's just about criticizing everything. It's a play on semantics. It's not a real school of philosophy. The theory was simple. Criticize every pillar of Western culture to demoralize people's belief and confidence in them. Family, democracy, common law, freedom of speech, right to own property, and all that. The hope was that these pillars would crumble under the pressure, which they have. Way to go, communists! Next was a book Theodore Adorno co-authored, The Authoritarian Personality. Excuse me. A drink. It redefined traditional American views on gender roles and sexual mores as prejudice. So, this is what I said before. The redefinition of words. The anti-positivism, negativism bullshit that allows for interpretation and redefinition. Okay? So, he compared them to the traditions that led to the rise of fascism in America. So the gender roles, sexual mores, the pillars of Western culture, patriotism, any form of nationalism is evil, and the kind of thing, and they made their best effort to associate these things with the rise of fascism. Now, is it just a coincidence that the go-to slur for the politically correct today is fascist? No, that's not a coincidence. The school pushed its shift away from economics and toward Freud by publishing works on psychological repression. Of course you would! Why would you talk about things like economics and real science when you can use psychology to manipulate and brainwash people? That's how you really change things. Their works split society into two main groups, which is, of course, what Marxism does. The main idea that they derived from Marx was that you split people apart into different factions and you can control them. You can polarize them. You can make them attack each other. You can destabilize society that way. You can brainwash them as groups. You can oppress them however you want by putting them into specific groups. That's one way you do it. So they argued that history and reality were shaped by those groups that controlled traditional institutions. No, America's not a constitutional republic. No! It's got lots of institutional biases and racism, and many of these institutions are specifically to work on the agenda of this group or that group. Well, what agenda? What's the goal? What institutions? Oh, well, we don't talk about that. Just like with critical theory, all they do is posit these claims, but they don't give an actual argument. At the time, that was code for males of European descent, meaning white privilege. From there, they argued that the social roles of men and women were due to gender differences defined by the oppressors, meaning feminism. As I said, there were a number of tools that the Frankfurt School enacted to fight Western society, and feminism is one of them. In other words, gender did not exist in reality, it was merely a social construct. Transsexuals! A coalition of victims. Adorno and Horkheimer returned to Germany when World War II ended. Herbert Marcuse, another member of the school, stayed in America. In 1955, he published Eros and Civilization. In the book, Marcuse argued that Western culture was inherently repressive because it gave up happiness for social progress. Oh, you're not happy. You're giving up your happiness for your society to become better and more comfortable, and better society will make people happy. But no, you're not as happy as you could be. And of course, if you demoralize people enough and make them feel ashamed of who they are by associating them with a particular evil group and then telling them they should feel guilty for their happiness, of course they're not going to be happy. The book called for polymorphous perversity, a concept crafted by Freud. Yeah. The Frankfurt School was just a hodgepodge of whatever will work to forward their agenda. A concept crafted by Freud. It prosed the idea of sexual pleasure outside the traditional norms, hence the women's liberation movement, or women's lib. Eros and Civilization would become very influential in shaping the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Yeah, what I just said. Meaning, destroy the nuclear family. Marcuse would be the one to answer Horkheimer's question from the 1930s. Who would replace the working class as new vanguards of the Marxist revolution? Right. So in old Soviet Russia, it was the workers who spurned on the revolution, and but who's going to do it in America? Because that just won't work there. The government and the systems of government and the institutions are too strongly ingrained. They have too strong a culture. And yeah, we actually did have a culture in America at one time. And people were proud of it, and people were patriotic and had some nationalistic feelings for their country, which isn't a bad thing. Extreme nationalism is bad. Some nationalism is not. So, the social movements of the 1960s, such as Black Power, feminism, gay rights, sexual liberation, gave Marcuse a unique vehicle to release cultural Marxist ideas into the mainstream. He basically camouflaged them within these movements in the forms of the teachings and writings from the leaders of those movements to further brainwash people, to rail against all things establishment. The Frankfurt School's ideals caught on like wildfire across American universities, which is why you saw all of those violent outbursts break out in Berkeley back in the 1960s and at other universities throughout the country, just like you're seeing now. The timing is awfully coincidental. Of course not. This was their goal. They've been working for 70 years to bring this stuff to fruition. Maybe more. Marcuse then published Repressive Tolerance in 1965, as the various social movements in America were in full swing. In it, he argued that tolerance of all values and ideas meant the repression of correct ideas. So what he's saying is that they're only correct ideas because the oppressors have imposed them upon you. So you have to cast them aside and adopt new radical ideals that are the opposite or contrary to the correct ideas given by your oppressors, which is Western society. It was here that Marcuse coined the term liberating tolerance. Of course, we all know it's nothing like that. It called for tolerance of any ideas coming from the left. Yes, but intolerance of those from the right. Precisely, because those views from the right are establishment, oppressive views coming from the oppressor, so they're all automatically wrong. It's just like how religion says that, you believe in God, you're going to heaven. If not, you're going to hell. There's all black and white. There's no gray. You're either good or you're evil. If you're with us, you're against us. That type of thing. And so there's no room for interpretation. So you cannot argue or debate with somebody who has been brainwashed, indoctrinated into this school, because if you're on the other side, you're automatically wrong. It's a brilliant tactic to inculcate these people against any type of ideas or ways of thinking about ideas that might lead them to cast off these beliefs that they have. Because if you have the right ability, if you have the right type of critical thinking, then you can figure out this stuff isn't quite right if you get the certain ideas that would essentially contradict what you believe. But if you're not even going to listen to the other people, if nothing they say is even worth processing, well then nothing that's done will have any effect on them. Now, it was here that Marcuse coined the term liberal tolerance, right? So essentially, any viewpoint that is on the right is wrong. It's also a basic trait of today's political correctness believers, and that comes from the Frankfurt School and Marxism in general. To quote Max Horkheimer, logic is not independent of content. Yes, it is! Oh my. Recalling the words of Winston, not that one. So, yeah. The Frankfurt School's work has had a deep impact on American culture. It has recast the homogeneous America of the 1950s into today's divided, animosity-filled nation. In turn, this has contributed to the undeniable breakdown of the family unit, as well as identity politics, the grouping that we were talking about before, radical feminism, and racial polarization in America. And this is just identity politics, the grouping that they do to break down society and break down the family unit. It's hard to decide if today's culture is more like Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's Brave New World. Never one to buck a populist trend, the political establishment in America has fully embraced the ideas of the Frankfurt School and has pushed them on American society through public miseducation, meaning that it first started with these pseudo-intellectual scumbags who were derelict nomads from various European countries where their ideas to replace their own country's systems with Marxism that they tailored and fashioned in their own ways that they thought would make it work, didn't work, then came to America and imposed these views here through using the free education system, which is really just an indoctrination system. Now, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the beacons of progressivism. Yeah. It's a nice word, progressivism, isn't it? It makes you think of the word progress, meaning to move forward. Right, but what are you moving forward to? Oh, well, we don't think about that. Moving forward is just a net positive. That's a good thing, so, you know, no. People don't look further than that. What are you moving forwards to? I mean, you can be progressing toward a cliff as well, and that's not really a good thing. So what you're moving toward, progressing toward, is important, not the progression itself. Now, these people both are disciples of Saul Alinsky, a devoted cultural Marxist. And so now we live in a hypersensitive society in which social memes and feelings have overtaken biological and objective reality as the main determinants of right and wrong. Now, political correctness is a war on logic and reason. To quote Winston, the protagonist in Orwell's Dystopia, freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 = 4. Right, to speak the truth, which we don't have in America right now. So we have this dystopian nightmare because of this school of rejects from Europe who had enough money and resources to relocate to America and were able to convince a lot of naive intellectuals at various institutions around the world to accept their ideas. They sounded very attractive. And at that time, as I said before, communism was a very popular idea and it was thought to be a great thing. And people in America didn't like the idea that it wouldn't work and couldn't believe if somebody told any of them that things were horrible in Russia, that it was true. When Ayn Rand came over here and she told people what it was really like in Russia, they just, you're full of shit, no way. I mean, people at that period in time were in love with the idea of communism. So that's how they got their hooks in. And once they had their hooks in, they never let them go. And so they educated the next generation of educators who went on themselves to become cultural Marxists and leftists, and they went on to educate every single person in this country. And they're all Democrats. They're all Democrats, the entire Democratic Party, barring maybe a few senators and congressmen. The majority of them are leftists. And the majority, I don't know that now the majority of Democrats in America are not leftists, but the majority of the people they elected are. And it's those people that make the laws and enforce the policies and enforce the laws. So that's a big problem. And because our educational institutions are run almost entirely by leftists, you have a 12-to-1 ratio average in universities throughout America. For every one Republican, there's 12 Democrats. And since Republicans tend to be conservative and Democrats tend to be progressives, which means Marxists, most students in America are learning to be communists. And we see that now with all of these hate groups and terrorist groups popping up, which, by the way, the FBI is doing nothing about because, again, all these institutions, which are not institutionally racist, they're institutionally leftist. I will speak more later on about the pillars of the Frankfurt School, but this video is getting a little long by now. So if you have any questions or comments, please post them, and I hope you subscribe. Take care.